Warhol and the Impersonation of Christ by Christopher Wynn. For Karen Wynn. Part 1. Quote, Andy Warhol made a statement by repeating famous icons until they became meaningless. End quote. Banksy, Exit Through the Gift Shop. When I was a youngster attending Sunday school, I did not know the expressions dumbing down or oversimplification. But, like Justice Potter Stewart said of pornography, I knew it when I saw it. Having read the Bible for myself, it was vaguely perplexing to see the complex character of Christ summarized with the words faith and love. Perhaps if these had been in the context of tough love and conviction, it wouldn't have bothered me. But always the Bible teacher's meaning was plain. Christ was faith and love in the way that playing nice with and thinking well of others is faith and love. How they derived this from the infinitely stern rabbi was beyond me. Were they reading the same book? Of all the words I would have used to describe Christ, chummy or agreeable were not amongst them. This was, after all, a person who goaded the societal leaders of his day to martyr him, hardly a people-pleaser. Only as I grew in wisdom and stature would I realize that the Christ of today is not the biblical Yeshua, but a fan fiction who I call Warhol Jesus. The problem with Warhol Jesus is that his faith and love is something most everyone except sociopaths already have. Hence Christ's rhetorical, "If ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same?" Or James's, "You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that." Reducing Christianity to the warm and fuzzies makes it accessible to all and useful to none, in that it renders the supposed Son of God as just another nice guy or prolific motivational speaker. BC and AD might as well be replaced with before and after Tony Robbins. This makes a watered-down fraction of Christ's complex whole, transfiguring the masculine Arab Jew into a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, ever-smiling, lamb-coddling, limp-wristed Warhol Jesus. The latter's sugar, spice, and everything nice obstructs or even obliterates the meatier concepts that Christ emphasized, particularly kingdom nigh and riches. Kingdom nigh is arguably the crux of Christ's teachings. It's a mystical urgency inspired by anticipated apocalypse and judgment, which inspires preparation and vigilance. To emphasize kingdom nigh over love is to utterly prioritize the spiritual over the social. Such a life is almost inevitably an austere and lonesome one, much like Christ's. Go figure, one of the best descriptions of kingdom nigh's ramifications comes from Death of God proclaiming Nietzsche. If Christianity were right, with its theories of an avenging God, of general sinfulness, of redemption, and the danger of eternal damnation, it would be a sign of weak intellect and lack of character not to become a priest, apostle, or hermit, and to work only with fear and trembling for one's own salvation. It would be senseless thus to neglect eternal benefits for temporary comfort. End quote. That's from Human All Too Human, Part 1, number 116. Nietzsche also addresses kingdom nigh versus faith. It is false to the point of absurdity to see in a belief, perchance the belief in redemption through Christ, the distinguishing characteristic of the Christian. Only Christian practice, a life such as he who died on the cross lived, is Christian. And that's from The Antichrist, number 39. Though emulation of Christ doesn't preclude belief in him, the point seems to be that faith without action is dead. Then there is the sticky wicket of Christ's attitude towards riches, that poverty is the only safe spiritual solution to the quandary of materialism. This definitely doesn't get preached alongside love and faith, mainly because pews and offering plates would go empty if it were. This may partially explain why Warhol Jesus' faith and love has been favored over Christ emulation within modern theology. However, the advantageousness of Warhol Jesus is not merely monetary. He has made straight the paths for leftism and social justice, particularly in the USA. Quote, "The majestic inauguration of the post-Christian era is a joke. We are living through a caricatural ultra-Christianity that tries to escape from the Judeo-Christian orbit by radicalizing Jesus' concern for victims in an anti-Christian manner." That's from I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, 178 to 179 by René Girard. Just as the satanic inverted crucifix is the corruption of a Christian symbol, so the left's American cultural coup was achieved by taking advantage of Christian principles. Warhol Jesus' faith and love is the sole explanation for why heavily armed and highly opinionated American Christians stood idly by while values wholly opposed to them, such as abortion, became the law of their land, proving once and for all that the give an inch, take a mile and slippery slope concepts are not fallacies. But render unto Caesar, you say. True, per Kingdom Nigh, Christ was apathetic about worldly politics. However, one cannot help but notice the contrasts between living under an all-powerful Roman tyranny and shrugging shoulders whilst allowing one's democracy to go to the dogs. Such lily-livered excuses are unbecoming of any supposedly patriotic American Christian, for the revolution that preceded the country would not have happened had this particular render unto Caesar mentality been equally applied to King George. Thus, Warhol Jesus makes emasculated pushovers of his devotees by a shallow, cookie-cutter philosophy, obstructing the reality of merchant-whipping, Pharisee-berating Yeshua so efficiently that he may be the best candidate yet for the title of Antichrist. Yet theologians have the audacity to be perplexed by the closing of churches, rise of atheism, and degeneracy of culture, as though the devaluation of the Christian brand which they presided over would have no consequences. Like abandoning a gold standard or overprinting a currency, making Christianity universally accessible has rendered it worthless. So long as one can feel Christian, or close enough, by niceness alone, what incentive have they to surpass that bare minimum? Between picking up a cross and picking up a donut at the church coffee bar, the choice is obvious. But what would the exorcism of Warhol Jesus entail? Simply taking Christ at his word. Christians would have to sell all they have and give it to the poor, preach the gospel as though the end of the world were impending, love their enemies and forgive their abusers, abandon friends and family for the cause, eradicate anything that causes them to sin, even unto physical mutilation, marry or preferably remain celibate, and continue this lifestyle until death by impoverishment or martyrdom, how 10 of Christ's 12 apostles died. Thus, the true origin of Warhol Jesus is revealed not in conspiratorial monetary or social agendas, but primarily in the unsustainability of Christ's teachings. It takes a rare combination of depression, desperation, self-loathing, imagination, wanderlust, and fearlessness to actually follow Christ. And however many such individuals may exist at a given time, they are not near enough to comprise an entire religion. Thus, the Christian enterprise had the choice either to peter out or make do with an agreeable alternative, mainly Warhol Jesus. Regrettably, he has done his job a bit too well. Warhol Jesus is now so mainstream that he is superfluous. Who doesn't own those faith and love embroidered placemats, or cross necklaces, or allegedly follow the golden rule? It's all been played out, done to death. It was a good run, 2,000 plus years, but it's getting old. Soon the fan fiction shall go the way of its source material. All that remains to be seen is whether the decline of the former may cause a renaissance of the latter. Part 2. Quote, "You make me master of the world where you exist. The soul I took from you was not even missed." End quote. Black Sabbath, Lord of this World. Warhol Jesus' unrelenting optimism would be forgivable if it were applied solely to the transcendent. Then impostor and imposed would be indistinguishable in their fanatical emphasis upon things not of this world. Source text and fan fiction only diverge when the cynicism of Yeshua is abandoned for a happy-go-lucky attitude regarding the current world. To remove Christ's sternness is to diminish his royal bearing, rendering the prince a pauper. And, since all great princes are also warriors, this revokes his status as the crucial combatant in a spiritual war on which the universal fate rests. The gravity of his situation and the reality of his mortal foe are like pressure applied to a wound. To release that pressure is to let the lifeblood of the Christian tradition spill freely. This is due to Yeshua being the emissary of an eccentric worldview wherein everything is vested with grave importance. He relates the microcosm of our mundane lives to the macrocosmic struggle between good and evil, insisting that all must pick a side and accept the consequences. His goal is to raise our existential stakes. No more may we think of ourselves as mere creatures attempting to look out for number one and perhaps do right by others between birth and death. Rather, we are eternal souls that must resist the influences of a wicked world at all costs. He would have us utterly invert the priorities of nature, abandon the daily grind to survive and thrive, for an idealistic aspiration outside of our mortal experience, like foolhardy adventurers willing to risk destruction for discovery. His is a fanaticism on par with the worst of cultists. The only difference is that his followers are meant to be violent unto themselves rather than others, an introverted Bushido. Yeshua's call to pick up your cross and follow me is, in end if not means, identical to downing a draught of Jim Jones' Kool-Aid. It will either end one's life literally, fed to lions, made into human torches, or colloquially. Any attempt to make this call jive with a happy, healthy, normal, or worldly lifestyle, at least in the modern sense, is Warholization, for one could not consider Yeshua's life to have been any of these things, and genuine Christianity is his emulation. To not worry for the morrow, nor store up treasures on earth, or hate one's enemies, or lust and fornicate. When those things are worded differently, it becomes evident that what Yeshua forbids is the very essence of existence. Imagine compelling any other creature not to prioritize feeding itself, or storing up for the winter, or harming its rivals, or procreating. Have you not effectively killed that creature? Or what have you left it with, except the metaphysical constructs that you have promised in return for this suicide? The only reprieve from immediate starvation provided is implied by Christ being a carpenter and Paul being a tent maker. Practicing a trade is permissible so long as one doesn't go and make too much money by it. The only way one could possibly justify this fanaticism is if one were to believe in Satan just as literally as they believe in Christ. Fear of God is not enough for a follower of Yeshua. They must also fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Forswearing worldliness of any kind hardly makes sense if the theology implicit within the American spiritual "he's got the whole world in his hands" is correct. For if the world is micromanaged by God, then it follows that worldliness is his will. Yeshua would doubtlessly prefer the sentiment of the English hymn "Onwards, Christian Soldier," wherein the world is a contested battleground. Consider the temptation in the desert, during which Satan offers Yeshua the kingdoms of the world. Though the devil is rebuked for this offer, it is not because he is offering something that belongs to God. Indeed, Christ later refers to Satan as the Lord of this world, confirming that he was offering something which is his to give. This is the crucial theological detail that Warholianity neglects. To the genuine Jesus, earth is a satanic domicile which he aims to reconquer. How different from that which most Christians know. Prayers for politicians and militaries, urges to vote where applicable, national flags gracing the sanctuary days. Again, Warholians have contorted the opaque slyness of "render unto Caesar" into an endorsement of nationalism. In truth, it was the only answer a Messiah could give who wanted to endorse neither a government nor a revolution. It is the most politically cynical statement ever uttered, recommending that one waste no energy either actively supporting or resisting unredeemable government. But naive nationalism is not the greatest Warholian disadvantage towards comprehending of Yeshua. Rather, it is ignorance of one's own evil. Just as Warholianity necessarily reduces the devil to a moral metaphor rather than a personified certainty, so the individuals who grow up as Warholians must inevitably come to feel that they have more or less been on the straight and narrow their entire lives. This renders Yeshua utterly incomprehensible to them, for his entire shtick is the essential forgiveness of otherwise unforgivable sin. Yet how can one's sin truly be forgiven, or forgiveness earnestly sought, if the sinner considers himself holy? That is why Tertullian insisted that Christians are born, not made, and Christ clarified that he came for the sick rather than the healthy. It is an undeniable, albeit costly, advantage to live an immoral life before learning of Yeshua, for one may then approach Christianity with perfect knowledge of evil. Those who have counted themselves amongst the elect for as long as they can remember cannot enjoy this advantage. Thus they may fall prey to the Pharisees' curse, growing so assured of their own redemption that their Redeemer seems superfluous. Warholianity aside, genuine Christianity can be but one of two things. Perhaps it is a tradition for depressives, a support group for personalities who suffer from moral hypersensitivity, like a tinnitus of the conscience. Irked by the constant vibration of existential evil and emptiness, they turn to Yeshua not to still this vibration, but to explain it. For often the horror of a thing is not the thing itself, but its mysteriousness. To their unanswerable why, he answers at length. To their dubious, there must be more, he nods encouragingly. And for those who can bear life no more, he forgives them their failure, providing various excuses for worldly mediocrity and suicide via martyrdom. If it is not this, then it must be the terrible, crucial revelation of mankind's meaning as agents of infinite import in the combat between devil and deity. And if it is the latter, then no reaction can be too extreme. Sinning limbs and organs must be excised, materialism must be utterly shed, and death must ultimately be preferred to life. Thus the question every would-be Christian should grapple with is whether they are truly prepared to trade the fun games of life on earth for Yeshua's sternest asceticism. Indeed, to be a true follower of his is to effectively forget that such fun is even possible, for cheer hardly befits a heaven-yearning prisoner in a hellish world. Thomas à Kempis summarizes, "Our life upon earth is verily wretchedness. The more a man desireth to be spiritual, the more bitter doth the present life become to him, because he the better understandeth and seeth the defections of human corruption. For to eat, to drink, to watch, to sleep, to rest, to labor, and to be subject to the other necessities of nature, is truly a great wretchedness and affliction to a devout man who would fain be released and free from all sin." That's from The Imitation of Christ, number 22. That is why the Gospels inform us that Jesus wept, but never that he smiled. Part 3. Quote, "Pastoral, adjective, of shepherds or country life, simple or naturally beautiful like the country, of a pastor, his office, or his duties." The World Book Encyclopedia Dictionary. Quote, "The Lord is a man of war." End quote. Exodus 15:3. To our modern Darwinian, Freudian, Marxist mindset, genuine Christianity can only ever seem like lunacy. This is not due primarily to the religion's mythological dubiousness. Rather, it is due to the base materialism that said mindset ascribes to all of man's motives. The fundamental assumptions of the mindset are that everyone would prefer to live forever, be rich, and have as much sex as possible. Because Christ meets none of these assumptions, Warhol Jesus was fabricated to bridge the philosophical gap between Yeshua's age and ours. Though unsuccessful, this attempt is understandable, for Yeshua's classical elements are far more difficult to accept today than his base metaphysics and morals. I find the dual meaning of pastoral quite evocative in this regard, for I increasingly suspect that Yeshua's disciples were originally meant to be more than metaphorically related to shepherding. To expound, we must attempt to set aside current Zionism for antique, average Jewishness, and consider several Old Testament precedents that Yeshua would have taken literally. The first few chapters of Genesis will do, in particular man's fall and the Tower of Babel. In the beginning onwards, Yahweh is presented in such a way as to have a humbling, even terrifying aspect, hardly the God to whom some now pray for parking spaces. Not just the maker, but the owner of mankind, his fondness for us is not to be mistaken with weakness. This need not have been said in Yeshua's classical age, where institutional powers were vested with at least some majesty, and every social interaction was hierarchical. It is only now that the most institutions are ridiculed pomposities and all men are created equal that we must redefine Yahweh's father-like love as it was originally understood, an undeserved and revocable gift. Indeed, he even states the terms upon which it can be revoked, to eat the forbidden fruit which bestows knowledge of good and evil. The ramifications of this have long been an interest of mine. What exactly is wrong with acquiring knowledge of good and evil? Loss of innocence, some say, but I believe it is the tempting snake which answers most accurately. It is wrong because it makes one, quote, like God, end quote. Yahweh confirms, quote, behold, the man has become as one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand, and also take of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. End quote. Thus it becomes clear that the knowledge of good and evil, moralizing, in a word, is a godlike ability unfit for mankind to wield. This is a colossal precedent, perhaps one of the Bible's greatest, yet it is largely ignored. From the start, we are told that our presumption to judge or ascribe moral values is unwarranted, undeserved, that our theft of it cost us paradise. By this precedent, man's moral compass is not just described as corrupt, it is described as effectively non-existent. We are, according to Genesis, simple, amoral beings who stole the cognitive ability to imagine things as good or evil, neither of which we are actually competent to do. For if our delusional moralizing was successful, we should merely remake an Eden and find bliss apart from Yahweh. Cue the Tower of Babel, where mankind set out to do just that by merging under one language and surpassing God via technology, architecture in this case. Yahweh has none of it and sends the architects packing back to their separate tribes and tongues, a Luddite precedent if ever there was one. By these Genesis precedents, Christ's dour worldly attitude is explained. His heavenly Father apportions man the pastoral and classical rights to till fields, birth children, and later in the Old Testament, wage war, but little else. Yet Christ, residing in Israel during its occupation by the Roman Empire, must have inevitably sensed and suffered from the urbanization and loss of tribal identity therein, if not the foreboding possibility that Rome would construct its own Babel. In other words, to a Jew who valued the humble, earthy, Yahweh-centric lifestyle of his ancestors, the colonial modernization of Rome would have seemed like the end of the world, just as we find in Matthew chapter 24. Despite this, Christ does not explicitly call for a return to the pastoral way. He seems to know that it is too late for that. Rather, he promotes another classical attitude, that of heroism. Whether one had cut their teeth on David versus Goliath or Achilles versus Hector, all at Christ's time and in Christ's vicinity would have been familiar with the heroism, wherein survival is sometimes forgivable, but desperation to survive is not. At that time, heroism was a death cult based on a sacrifice in servitude, where one could almost say that living victors were good but dead heroes were better. Or, as Christ put it, there is no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. During that dawning decadent age, where colonized Jews and colonizing Romans would have alike looked back upon their culture's foundational heroic texts with a blend of nostalgia and melancholy, any romantically inclined party would have been smitten by a man who figured out how to embody that mode of glorious tragedy in their present day. Hence Pilate's apparent respect for Christ and the centurion's climactic utterance post-crucifixion, "Truly this was the Son of God." Roman soldiery and the Jewish working class alike knew a hero when they saw one, attesting to the common cultural link that spread Christ's cult from Golgotha to the court of Constantine. Thus Yeshua recruited a pacifistic army to answer the onslaught of decadence, one which boasted martyrdoms rather than murders, strengthened and spread by resistance, taking the subtle tact that if man cannot return to how he should live pastorally, then he can at least die heroically under the banner of Yahweh, the Heavenly Father who, in principle if not person, is an aggregate of classical values, an embodiment of natural law. Thus he saved souls from soul-destroying modernism, which he would likely have called Satanism. If freedom is one's poison of choice, they had best look elsewhere than Yahweh, Yeshua, and their Spirit, for this Trinity is the ultimate tyranny. Its political disinterestedness should not be mistaken for leniency with differing opinions, for whoever is not with me is against me. They are might makes right from on high, transcending man's every construct and critique. I make peace and create evil. By comparison, Satan is the far more sympathetic character. Thus William Blake quipped that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, due to Paradise Lost's endearing Lucifer. This unrelatable, even abhorrent tendency towards the Trinity has and shall continue to increase over time, for the further away man is from the fields, families, and fighting of his origin, the uglier it will seem. Their churches may remain, but the deity worshipped therein will be, and perhaps already is, Mammon. Thus Christ may be understood as the ultimate conservative, a spiritual authoritarian or fascist, wiser than all others in that he knew he would not stop the postmodernist outcome that he anticipated and opposed. Indeed, his scriptural claims predict with eerie accuracy his own legacy. To be known everywhere, this gospel shall be preached in all the world. Yet disliked within popular culture, ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And widely impersonated, many will come in my name and shall deceive many. Today, as progressivism colonizes and ludicrously moralizes all, and its accompanying technology approaches a self-deifying singularity, his prophecies are vindicated. All that is left, then, is to decide whether he was merely the greatest far-right romantic or the Logos of God. That distinction may increasingly blur as it becomes apparent that man has lost its way amidst interstates and the internet. The animal that we so evidently are, that we were designed to be, whether one could call that design intelligent or not, is slowly dissolving as though submerged in acid by our newfound natureless lives of chaotic convenience. Eons of strength and simplicity have been lost just within my grandparents' lifetime, and I wonder if any will survive my own, save in third-world countries where the option of progress has not yet arrived. These events were utterly unimaginable less than 200 years ago, and yet they are found in Revelation, Nostradamus, and the works of most any other seer of visions or dreamer of dreams who has accepted Pascal's wager. What I am arguing, in effect, is that even if the Bible were utterly removed from the world, this Logos could be arrived at anew. If these were silent, the very stones would cry out. I do not say this to diminish Christ as an individual, but to elevate him as a principle, which is how the Gospel of John introduces him. There we are told all things were made through him, a far cry from the current habit of attributing nature and natural law to paganism, which leaves Christianity as an aberration. Rather, Christ considered himself to be the intended of creation, classically pastoral and heroic, amidst prevailing perversion. If that is the case, and the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, then Christ may be found not only sans Bible, but sans Christianity. This realization may be of some importance when only Warholianity remains. Ultimately, how one could be Yeshua without being God will come to seem a greater mystery to a true Christian than how God could become flesh. Dostoevsky's wording cannot be surpassed. Quote, I want to say to you about myself that I am a child of this age, a child of unfaith and skepticism, and probably, indeed I know it, shall remain so to the end of my life. How dreadfully has it tormented me, and torments me even now, this longing for faith, which is all the stronger for the proofs I have against it. And yet God gives me sometimes moments of perfect peace. In such moments I love and believe that I am loved. In such moments I have formulated my creed wherein all is clear and holy to me. This creed is extremely simple. Here it is. I believe that there is nothing lovelier, deeper, more sympathetic, more rational, more manly, and more perfect than the Savior. I say to myself with jealous love that not only is there no one else like him, but that there could be no one. I would even say more. If anyone could prove to me that Christ is outside of the truth, and if the truth really did exclude Christ, I should prefer to stay with Christ and not with truth. That is from Letters of Dostoevsky to his family and friends, translated by Maine in 1914, letter 21. And for those contented with nothing less than certainty, let them dwell upon Paul's, if Christ be not risen, then is our preaching vain. Certainty requires no faith nor courage. Part 4, quote, Everlasting life for me in a perfect world, but I've got to die first. Please God, send me on my way. End quote. In my darkest hour, Megadeth. Quote, Kyrie eleison, at least exist for me, in erewise hopeless heart, if not actually. Knowing faith is the opposite of certainty. Hoist a cross, though 'tis weighted with absurdity. For naught is more absurd than a world without thee. If not thine slave, then I would be but falsely free. Let not life be as cheap as it appears to be. Quid est veritas? Nil, if thou be not in me. End quote. Poem by author. I know only one manner of thinking that could dissuade Dostoevsky. Though Christ's cult of personality be unassailable, the religion that bears his name lies exposed. Critiquing Christianity with the reasoning that we may know Christ by his fruits is a means of striking the shepherd by scattering the sheep. I do not mean attacking Christians as a group, for experience has taught us that any atrocity may be committed in the name of Christ without it blemishing him in the eyes of his disciples. Rather, I mean Christianity as a theology or a series of existential assumptions. For example, we have already discussed the cruciality of the devil and all he represents. Calvinists and their ilk are invulnerable to the following attack, because their equation that God's will equals whatever happens leaves no room for a genuine adversary. For them, everything and everyone are God's pawns, and thus the onus of all things good, evil, and neutral fall ultimately upon him. To Christians who do not worship this God who is both devil and deity, the following question should be posed. Why did Yahweh allow evil at all? Now, the obvious riposte to this is that God desires man to genuinely love him, and genuine love requires free will, and free will means the ability to commit evil. This seems fair enough until one considers eternal damnation, in which case the ramification is that God subjects the creations he supposedly loves to the possibility of unending agony just so that he can feel loved by some of them. This becomes even more dubious when one considers that God by definition does not need anything, so this desire for love may be portrayed as pure vanity. Earthly suffering alone can deliver a similar blow. Take the following thought experiment. If you are capable of feeling for a moment all the suffering that every human being, living or dead, has ever experienced, would you thereafter honestly be able to claim that this existence is due to a loving God? Only a lack of imagination or empathy can save one from a conclusion in the negative, though this again presupposes that God condones whatever he allows. Lesser potshots like the following may hit a nerve as well. Why did God design us so that it is anatomically possible for rape to occur? Why not simply make it so that the only sexual acts that can happen must be consensual? Even if he must allow evil for the sake of free will, that does not diminish the fact that the very parameters of possible evil are his to determine. Thus every abomination is an abomination that he chose not to disallow, which returns us to the paradoxical implication that Yahweh punishes us for his ills. Whether the devil's will be truly adversarial to his or not, the fact remains that God could unmake or undo all wrongs whenever. That he does not explains the prevalence of the Christian platitude, "He works in mysterious ways." Yet there is nothing more mysterious than a creation that, having corrupted itself, responds by cursing its creator for bringing it into an existence capable of corruption. Or so it seems to me when I consider the natural world, wherein most evils are necessities, and compare those to the meaningless cruelties of which we humans are capable. There is a deeper, more abstract level upon which one might storm this heaven's gates. That is to frame Christianity as the religion of discontent. One need only belittle its constant negativity in regards to what is, arguing that if paganism was the immoderate spiritual tradition of seeing nothing wrong with the world, then Christianity is the equally immoderate tradition of seeing nothing right with it. Thus the entire religion may be made to seem like a morbid crossroads between mysticism and maladaptive perfectionism, or, less grandiosely, as the dogmatic refusal to accept life until it is exactly as one wants it to be, wherein any semblance of contentment or peace is contingent upon faith that one will get their way in a promised future or afterlife. I would take the Church's otherwise unexplainable obsession with forbidding suicide as a prime example. Genuine Christianity is just about the direst existential conclusion that one could ever hope to reach. If earth is so horrible and heaven so wonderful, then it stands to reason that one should hasten to Christ's embrace by the most expedient means. Indeed, to tarry upon earth is to risk damnation, so even if life is somewhat tolerable for a believer, it would be foolish to hazard their immortal soul for a few more years within this vale of tears. Thus the suicide taboo was necessary in the extreme to prevent the new-formed church with its non-Warholized zealots from dying like Judas in droves. But the alternative to this discontent is to be contented with the world, an equally spurious proposition when one has enough empathy to feel or IQ to comprehend the suffering within it. Is it ethical to wear the dismissive, even indifferent Mona Lisa smile of a Buddha whilst surrounded by earthly horror? Or is it simply the nature of things that a man who would be moral in an immoral world must be haunted by the incongruity between ideal and reality? Finally, there is the very complexity of the religion. Its vast and varied theological thought may conspire to make one feel as though they are in the presence of man-made chaos rather than divine peace. One could quip that the importance of a field of study often correlates to its complexity, but I would reply that God knows his audience, and can be as concise or incomprehensible as he chooses. If this good news is indeed crucial to the spiritual fate of mankind, then surely it should be accessible to all men. Instead, we find a totality akin to law, wherein even the most devoted lawyer cannot absorb, much less comprehend it holistically. One could respond that Christianity is best when unexamined, and I would have to agree. But I should then ask them whether they take the same tact relationally, financially, or in any other way. Beautiful from afar, ugly up close is not a compliment anyone wants to receive, God least of all. There is little to be done here apologetically, except to hazard that if the devil has been allowed to corrupt the world entire, then that must by necessity include even the means by which the world is to be redeemed. I have, of course, neglected an entire universe of anti-Christian arguments that consist of demanding non-existent evidence for the religion's miraculous claims. These I leave to those who cannot appreciate that if there is anything beyond us, then it is just that, beyond us. That being said, the unfalsifiability of that position is not lost on me. Part 5. A Prophetic Dream. The digital visage of the AI pastor flashes pearly whites across the dual floor-to-ceiling screens. Intermittently, the message 420 friendly is superimposed over his God-sized face. Congregants smoke and dance at the sanctuary front as though it were a mosh pit, frenzied devotees occasionally climbing the ornamental pulpit and casting themselves from it, bodies cruciform, to surf the crowd or splatter the nave. In the sanctuary center, the endless pews are temporarily interrupted by a platform which hoists the newest flying car, preloaded with Christian vehicular essentials like a fish bumper sticker and cross-shaped air freshener. Criers hawk their wares up and down the aisles, dispensing popcorn, beer, and the complimentary abridged Bibles that bear the logos of various corporate and political entities. The innumerable exits are flanked by consoles for the renting of various forms of entertainment media, as well as condom dispensers like one finds in truck stop bathrooms. Digitized offering plates are passed by feminized androids, the bold text adorning their silicone breasts reading Lilith. Donations, along with the names of the generous givers, run at the periphery of the pastoral screens, eliciting applause and randomized prizes. A gaggle of drive-through windows pockmark the holographic stained glass walls, offering on-the-go absolution, as well as discounted coffee and donuts to commuters. The pastor's voice blares over the din to welcome this Sabbath's guest speaker, an AI theologian in the form of a spider with a red sigil embossed upon his back. The crowd shrieks its welcome, Asmodeus, Asmodee. Scuttling to the forefront, the great spider takes a bow, seemingly choked up by this warm welcome, and after a few kindly repetitions of, thank you, God damn you all," commences preaching.